Hi everybody. So this is going to be a tutorial in the assignment that I'm going to have you guys do this week. We're going to start learning our hard surface modeling techniques. So if we take a look here, we have our hard surface creation. And usually when I think of hard surface and ZBrush, I think about where do I start? What tools, what techniques do I use? What workflows do I use to create hard surface objects within ZBrush? Because when we think of ZBrush, we think of organic modeling. We think of clay. We think of sculpting. We don't typically think of hard, mechanical, man-made objects being made in ZBrush. But ZBrush is an extremely powerful tool, and we can make just about anything that we can imagine. So hard surface is definitely something that ZBrush has come a long way on, and they are now beginning to really take the industry by storm with a lot of their new tools that they have. But we're going to start this semester with the first set of tools that ZBrush came out with to really kind of start their journey in the hard surface world. Before these tools came out, you could still do hard surface in ZBrush, but this was their first real big attempt into giving the artist actual tools to use to create mechanical style objects. So we're going to go over a couple of brushes, the clipping brushes obviously, planer brushes, and polish brushes. We're also going to go over masking. Masking is a huge tool when it comes to creating hard surface. You will use masking all the time, and you will have to get used to different ways for selecting your mask and different techniques when it comes to using our mask in order to segregate certain objects so we can use our hard surface techniques on them. Finally, we're going to learn how to use our transpose lines. A lot of people look past these tools because they dive right into the brushes and they try to sculpt out everything and clip away and do all of those things, but your transpose lines are actually extremely powerful, and your transpose lines mixed with your masking was what ZBrush has always had, and people were able to create hard surface even back before the clipping and planer brushes and things like that were created. So these are super powerful, and I advise you to not look past these and just go right into panel loops and all of the other fancy options that ZBrush has to create hard surface. Starting with these basic tools can really get you a long way really quickly, and that's what we're going to go over today. For your assignment, you're going to need to just create 3 hard surface style objects. Now they can be anything at all. They just need to be mechanical and man-made in nature. We like to stick towards metal objects just because they are the best representation of hard surface. So if you're thinking about robot parts or gun pieces or armor pieces, things like that, we really want to stay towards the mechanical, man-made style objects. Now, the object that I'm going to be creating today is a good representation of the type of objects that you're going to need to make. They're not super in depth, but they do cover all of these techniques, and you will need to make 3 different ones and submit images of each one. So let's get started. So we open up ZBrush, and what we're going to be using today are just the primitives. So if we have ZBrush, if you look at my interface, it's going to look a little bit different. You'll see some brushes docked down here at the bottom. You'll see some other things docked up here. And my screen is actually a little squished because I need to allow the video editor that I'm using to capture the entire screen. So some of these options over here are a little hidden, but These are all extra things that I've added. If you go into Preferences, you can configure your settings and pretty much grab anything from the interface that you like, and you can dock it out here in your palettes for quicker use. And you'll notice my colors are a little bit different. Those can all be adjusted in Preferences too. So don't feel like you need to set your interface up like mine is set up. I've just put some of my favorite and most used buttons and brushes out here so I can gain quick access to them. But you're not going to need any of that. We're just going to be using the interface as if it was default. So just don't get distracted by that. All of these commands and workflow tips that we're going to be doing today are all, you'll be able to do all of them. I don't have anything different that isn't somewhere in the interface. They've just been dragged out for easier use. So to start, we're going to go over here to our tool palette, and we're going to click here, and we're going to look at our 3D mesh primitives. And I always like to start with either a sphere or a cylinder. I think I'm going to start with a cylinder this time. And I'm going to drag my cylinder out into my scene, and I'm going to hit the T key, or I'm going to come up here and hit Edit before I do anything. Second thing I'm going to do is get away from that red wax, because that's the worst. I hate red wax. So if anyone's ever had a class with me, they know that they should never turn in anything with me in that red wax, especially this class because it's hard surface. Red wax is just terrible. I know for those of you who got to have their first class with me, heard my whole explanation on why I don't like red wax. But just don't submit anything in the red wax. It's awful for specularity, and it doesn't allow me to see shadows really well. So let's just stay away from that. Usually the basic material is a good bet. So I just click on the basic material, and then before I do anything, I come up and I do Make Polymesh 3D. If I attempt to do anything, you're going to see it's going to change. It's going to say I can't do anything until I make it a polymesh. We're going to go over some techniques before we make it a polymesh a little later, but we're going to jump right in right now. So if I come up and do Make Polymesh, now I can edit directly on my model. So the first thing I'm going to do is hit X on the keyboard. So that's going to bring me into symmetry here, you can see. If I come up to my transform palette, which is a little squished, you'll see you can activate symmetry X if you forget the hotkey. But X is the hotkey for it, so it's pretty easy to remember. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make a very basic object using a couple of tools. The first thing I want to do is I want to up my geometry a little bit. So we're at 400 polygons, which is not very much. When we're doing hard surface, you typically want some higher resolution depending on what you're making, just because it allows for crisper edges. And as we go through the class, you'll see where we need to subdivide and where we don't need to subdivide to really kind of achieve what we're trying to get. So I brought this guy right up to 500,000 polygons. We might not need that many, so I'm going to come back down to 120. And the first tools we're going to go over are the most basic of ZBrush. So we have masking and our transpose lines. So if I hold Control down, I'm going to drag out a mask marquee here, and that's going to mask my model. And if I hold Control and tap in an empty area, it's going to invert my mask. And then if I'm holding the Control key and I click on my brush palette, you'll see it brings up my mask brushes here. I'm going to use just the marquee for now, so it's just that draw out here. And then I'm going to invert my mask, and then I'm going to come up here to my transpose lines. There's 3 different tools here. They call them transpose tools. And when I draw or click on one of these, you'll see an action line appears. That's what this is called. So what I'm going to do is I click on an empty area and I start to drag out my line. Now if I'm dragging the line out and I hold Shift, it's going to snap it to about every, I think, 15 degrees. That way I can keep nice angular snaps. Now when I'm drawing my action line, if I keep my line on my mesh, you'll see it follows the surface. Now if I draw my line and I bring it off my mesh, you'll see it stays perpendicular to my mesh. So this is something to keep in mind whenever we're doing hard surface. If you're trying to pull straight out or straight away from an area, you usually want to come off your mesh so you can get a nice straight line. An example of that is if I was to pull here and come straight up holding shift and go to my move, now I can pull straight up and down. Now if I had stayed on my mesh and started to do that, now I'm a little crooked, you can see, and I can't pull straight up holding shift. I get some funky wonky things going on. So I'm just going to pull straight up, and I'm just going to hold shift, and I can pull this up a little bit. And now with my transpose tools, wherever I have an active point, so you can see my cursor is floating over my mesh. Now it's floating over vertices. If I bring this to the very center and I tap, it's going to put that right in the center, and wherever you tap, it's going to draw that line perpendicular out from that vertice. So if I tap here, it's going to draw 2 out because I have symmetry on. And then if I find that dead center, because I have symmetry, you can see it kind of snaps. I'm going to tap. Okay. Now the reason I want to do that is because now I'm going to go to scale, and then I'm going to scale up my object. And I want it to get it right in the dead center so it scales evenly all the way around. Now what we can do again is we can bring this up, or we can hit Control. Oh, sorry. Oh, we need to mask again. So Control, drag in an empty area. And I'm going to drag out another mask. And then I'm going to hit Control. And you can see it breaks away right there. It gives me an edge loop when I hit Control and then start to drag. So that's really important. If we turn on the wireframe, and we drop the resolution way down. So if we drop the resolution way down, now if I just pull away, you'll see it just stretches that polygon. Now if I hit Control, oh, hold on. It's being a little wonky on me. Oh, it might not do that because I have my resolution slider all the way down. So you can see it kind of left that masking behind there a little bit. So it actually created an edge loop for me. Right there. You can really see it with the mask. It really just kind of divided that nicely instead of just stretching it out. It gave me a nice edge loop right there. Now what I can do is I can, using that same point, now I can scale back down. And then mask again. Still, I hit Control and then I'm still holding Shift. And then I'm going to scale up one more time. Okay. So you can see I can already start to get some hard surface effect just by masking and transposing. So mask, move, and scale. You can already start to get some ideas. You know, maybe this could be the base of a staff or a piece to a machine. But then we can get into the fun stuff. So if we go from here and then we get into our clipping brushes, we hold Control and Shift. That brings up our selection brush palette. And you can see right up front here we have our clipping brushes. Clip rectangle, really just, I have a very hard time with it. It does work about 40% of the time. This is one of the more broken brushes within ZBrush. But the clip curve and the clip circles, they work great. The clip curve is my favorite. This one doesn't always do what you expect it to do. Sometimes it does, majority of the time it does not. So typically I'll stick with clip circle, circle center, and clip curve. So we'll select clip curve, and you'll see I got these kind of rounded ends to my piece here. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift down so my clip curve's activated, and then I'm going to drag out a line, and it's going to clip it nice and flat. So now I have a nice flat machined looking piece. Now whenever I use the clip, you'll notice it has a gradient on it. So everything from that dotted line to the top of that gradient, so everything from the dotted line towards the black gradient will get clipped. If it's facing the opposite direction, it's going to try to clip everything. So say I wanted to clip the top of this, but I had it facing the wrong way, it's going to clip everything down to that. So just be wary. Once I hold Control and Shift and I start dragging my line out, I can actually let go of the buttons on my keyboard. Now all I have is my pen cursor on my tablet right now. I'm not holding Control and Shift any longer. So what that allows me to do is it allows me to hold Shift to snap it, constrain it to an axis, so you can see I'm constraining, and it also kind of snaps it. And it also lets me hold the space bar and move it around. So if I want to pan it and get it just right, so say I just wanted to catch this fine edge here, then I could hold Shift and drag out and then let go of my pen, and it'll clip that edge for me. Now the clip curve is also great. You can come in and you can do 45 degrees. You can kind of cut some objects off here to try and make it look a little bit more manufactured. See here. Okay, we're starting to get a neat look. And we can come up and try out one of our clip circles. These work a little bit different. Holding Control and Shift, drag out my circle. Then once I start to drag it out, I can let go of Control and Shift, and I can hold my space bar. Now, when it's white like this, it's going to keep everything that's inside of the white. So if I were to let that go, you see it's going to snip everything down to that. Now if that's not what I wanted, if I was intending to clip out that section, drag it back out. And then once I get it in position to where I want it, say something like this, then I'll hold Alt and turn it black, and then let go. And then it will clip away the way I was hoping. Now you'll run into some problems with clipping. You'll see I've got a little bit of overhang here. That's because clipping doesn't actually clip off anything. It actually just squashes the geometry down to wherever your clip line is at. So you just need to play with it and be conscious of that while you're clipping. That sometimes you will get a little bit of overhang. And it's okay to come in here and kind of smooth this out a little bit. And sometimes it's a little bit of a battle with resolution. But we're not going to worry too much about how to fix all of these little problems yet. I really want you guys to just get used to using these tools. So don't be too hard on yourself with this stuff. I want you to just kind of use these tools to create some manufactured items. So see, we come in and add a little bevel, and that gets rid of some of it. We can also do some interesting things with the clip circle. So if we whenever we drag out our clip circles, if our little plus sign in the middle is off of the mesh, should clip away for us like that. But if we were to drag out our circle and bring that plus sign over the mesh, it's going to do a really odd thing. It's going to fill that whole area, which may seem odd at first, but sometimes that can actually be a good thing. It's not going to show up on our cylinder here very well, but I'll add one here in the middle just for fun. So if we think about that, now maybe we could add a little bolt there in the middle and we get a nice little recess here that could be potentially the makings of a joint for a robot arm or something cool, a mechanical piece. You add a little insert mesh bolt there that we'll go over later. We'll do insert meshes later on. But it's a neat little technique that you can use. That's dragging out the circle and putting the plus sign over your mesh and then holding Alt. And you can see it's all messed up in here, but we're not too worried about that because maybe this will be covered. But we do get that cool little recess there. So I'll undo those. Okay, and then let's start with a new mesh here really quick. So if I have my classic sphere, we're going to go over just a couple more of the brushes. So we have, remember, our clipping brushes. These are great too. Not only can we drag these out, but then as we're dragging out here with our clip curve, we can hit Alt, and that will set a point. So we can clip some interesting things like that. If we double tap Alt, so click it twice, I can do a 90-degree. So I can get some nice sharp edges, and I can do that pretty much as many times as I want, as long as I don't come back on the line too many times. You can see I can get some pretty neat effects. So say I come in here and clip this out like that. Now say I decided that I wanted to plane this whole side out, and I didn't really want to clip it, but I wanted to get a little bit more control. I could use a brush, so I'm going to hit my brush palette, I'm going to hit P on the keyboard, and then I'm going to pick this brush, the planer brush. And what this brush does is wherever I start drawing from, so I start right here, it defaults to that height. And then everything that's in that, not in that height's range, will get pushed down. So if I start drawing here from that height, you'll see it starts to push all of that down nice and flat. So now I can flatten that whole area out completely. So it's a really quick way to kind of come in and maybe add a little recess in that you can smooth back, or if you just want to plane out an entire area really quickly, it does a really great job of that. This also helps when you have some of those clipping artifacts that I showed you earlier. That can be really helpful to kind of clean some of those areas up. One final brush that we use is one of my favorites. It's the H polish brush. So after you create some high-res details, and say you want to just kind of polish up an area to help, so let's maybe do a little bit of sculpting here, and we've built this form up a little bit, and we've kind of smoothed it out. but it doesn't, it doesn't quite get rid of that lumpiness. We'll go to our brush palette and we'll hit H, and it defaults to H polish because that's the only brush that begins with H. And then we can kind of come in here and start to really knock that area down. And the H polish gives you a lot of control over your mesh, but it allows you to kind of add some polish detail to unusual shapes. So if you have a shape that's not quite a circle, not quite a square, you can't quite clip it off, but it's still too lumpy and bumpy, and you wish that you could maybe just polish it up a little bit, just to kind of make it look a little bit more manufactured. This is a great brush. So then I can come back in with that planer brush now, and right on the top I can kind of just buzz around here just to make sure that top is nice and flat. And you can see I can kind of make that a little bit more manufactured looking. It's kind of a freehand way to do it, but sometimes you get yourself into situations where you can't quite get the look that you want, and you may just want to go in and do some little freehand controlling. So I'll usually hit it with the H polish like that, and then I'll grab my smooth brush that we're all familiar with and just kind of smooth out some of those finer details. And then you can start to get, some more organic hard surface type stuff. So what I want you to do is, I have an object here. I want you to make an object a little bit more in depth than this. I want to see at least 2 indications of every technique: the masking, the transpose lines, and your clipping and your polish brushes used on each piece. So use your imagination. They don't need to be super complex pieces. They can be nice and small like this. But feel free to mix and match, so you can add parts to it. So if we go to our subtool palette and we go to append, I can append other primitives to it. So if I have that sphere, you can see I can append a sphere here like this. And then I can go back in and I can start playing around with the techniques on my sphere. And this is obviously me going very quickly, but you get the idea. You can just kind of really come in here and start to really add some detail in. But I want you to create 3 separate objects and just mix and match your primitives. Pick a primitive, and then you can append some other ones to it, just like I did here. That was append subtool. And then pick another primitive. And then just subdivide up these primitives. And using those techniques, we're going to just create some basic objects. I just want you guys to get used to using the transpose lines. I want you to get used to masking. And I want you to get used to using those basic clipping brushes and polish brushes. Those are going to be tools that we use on every single project, and they are kind of the cornerstone of our hard surface modeling here. So just create some basic objects, and I just want to see all the techniques being used, and then post 3 separate images of your objects, and Then we'll critique them and we'll discuss what techniques you used, and that way I can see your workflow and to make sure that you have a good understanding of using these basic tools that I showed. So good luck, everybody, and I will see you in the forums.